Now, I didn't do this on purpose, but it seems like this is the second movie in a row that I'm reviewing that was super successful when it came out, and then in later months or later years suffered huge backlashes. And this movie actually might be the original backlash movie, so let's talk about that. Titanic. Now, Titanic came out in 1997, was directed by James Cameron, and was hugely successful, and everybody went to see Titanic. It was a huge event movie. It was the highest grossing movie of that year, and the highest grossing movie of all time for a while. I think it has been supplanted at this point, but Titanic was huge. It was everywhere. It was super popular with audiences and with the Academy. It won 11 Oscars, including Best Picture. It was truly a lightning in the bottle type movie that somehow managed to please regular moviegoers and the critics and the Academy and all those film snobs that like to talk and dissect movies. But then something happened shortly after it won Best Picture. There was a huge backlash from Titanic. Everyone started dumping on it and picking out plot holes and things that are melodramatic or not realistic and just tearing this movie apart, to the point where me watching it again for this video, I had a legitimate concern as to whether or not it actually held up. And I gotta say, despite all the criticisms that it's gotten over the years, I thoroughly enjoy Titanic. And not only do I think it's good, I think it's great. And it may be this generation's version of Gone with the Wind. I know that seems kind of like a stretch, and what do you mean by Gone with the Wind? Gone with the Wind is about the Civil War. It's very different subject matter. But hear me out, because I think if you look at Gone with the Wind a little bit, you can understand why Titanic hit so many people the way it did when it came out. Because even though the subject matter is very different, the actual storytelling techniques are similar. There's actually more overlap between the two than you might think. Think about it this way. Both movies are over 3 hours long, and they're both period melodramas. Now, what does that mean? Well, you're forcing the audience to sit in a theater for a very long time to really get involved with these characters. There's a lot of character development. There's romances that blossom. And it gives us time to really feel like we're in that world, that other time period that the film's presenting to us. So the longer runtime does make these period dramas feel a bit more real and a bit more relatable, because we have time to adjust. Now, the period element is also interesting in both cases because it does offer a certain escapism to a simpler time or just a different time where a lot of the political issues are somewhat different than what we face today. Or in both cases, whether it's the antebellum South or the Gilded Age, both movies present this idea of a simpler time, that when reality hits, it just all comes crashing down, whether that's the events of the Civil War or an iceberg that totally changes their lives going forward. And then we have the melodrama aspect of this movie. And this is the part that I think loses a lot of people, especially the guys in the plot department, because we're usually not ones for romances and melodramatic situations and love triangles, and usually that comes across as very tedious and a chick flick thing. Both movies do have this. Gone with the Wind's romances are kind of intermittent throughout the whole movie, but with Titanic it's very simple to explain. You have the first half of the movie completely dedicated to Jack and Rose's relationship. Kate Winslet and Leonardo DiCaprio are both fantastic as Jack and Rose. Jack is a street urchin in Paris that's a starving artist that barely makes it onto the ship because he won tickets at a game of poker. And Kate Winslet's this young rich girl who comes from old money, but the money's starting to run out, so she needs to marry this rich tycoon Cal, played by Billy Zane, who is just a delight to see, and he's really the one that brings the melodrama to this movie. His performance can be seen as over the top, but given the genre that they're going for, a little bit more of a heightened reality, a little bit more of an old Hollywood style of filmmaking and acting that does kind of go back to Gone with the Wind. They're very similar styles. I feel like all the principal characters capture that tone really well. They elevate some of the aspects that need to be elevated, and then they kind of like hand wave away some of the things that really don't matter. But having a 3 hour plus period melodrama doesn't necessarily equal success, and both Gone with the Wind and Titanic know this. What they need is something to hook the guys into the seats too, and that is action. Both movies have incredible action and tension and suspense and a sense of survival that our characters might not make it out alive. With Gone with the Wind is very clearly demonstrated in the Civil War section and even some of the Reconstruction era stuff. And in Titanic, it happens right when you hear the words iceberg right ahead. All of a sudden the movie changes and now you're in a James Cameron action survival movie. The ship is going to sink in a couple hours and about half the people on board are gonna die. And how does that play out? Well, it actually does play out in a pretty exciting and interesting fashion, still keeping a consistent tone with the melodrama earlier in the movie, so everything's still a little heightened, a little bit more theatrical then it probably went down. But that still doesn't negate the heart-pounding tension that you feel when you see the water levels start to rise very slowly in these lower cabins, and as they're going through the different corridors, the different damage that the ship is taking. It is some very impressive filmmaking, so I gotta give James Cameron credit where it's due. So yeah, that was kind of a long-winded way of explaining why this movie was so successful when it came out, because it basically took what Gone with the Wind did and was super successful with and has left such an amazing legacy on film. It basically did the same thing again, but with a different historical event. And just like how Gone with the Wind had mass appeal to everybody, Titanic also, by following in the same footsteps, had a mass appeal for everybody. Women love the romance, guys love the action. The critics probably love all the historically accurate details that made it into this movie, because James Cameron definitely did his research on the Titanic. This movie didn't happen just by accident. It's not like James Cameron found a script for Titanic and was like, oh yeah, I'll make that movie. No, this was a passion project for him. He made this movie from the ground up based on research and interest that he already had in the recent discovery of the sunken Titanic, and how that discovery changed how we viewed the event, how we learned that the ship actually split in half when it sank, and all those fun details. That was a real point of interest for Cameron, and it got to a point where he's like, well, I might as well make this movie because I'm already spending all my time here. I'm not going to be doing a play-by-play of the plot of this movie. All you really need to know is that Jack and Rose have a blooming romance on the Titanic, and they're from different classes. All of your typical melodramatic class issues and conversations will come up there, which feeds into Rose needing to make a choice whether she's going to run away with Jack when they land in New York, or if she's going to actually marry Cal and stay the upper class lady that her mom wants her to be. And honestly, as I explain it now, it seems a lot lamer than when you watch it in the movie, and part of that's just because of the craft and care that James Cameron takes in telling this story. Yeah, it's very bare bones Gilded Age melodrama, and in the wrong hands it could have come off as super phony and artificial and cheesy. But I gotta say, when you watch it, you do kind of get swept up in the romance of it all. And that's a tribute to the incredible cast: DiCaprio, Kate Winslet, Billy Zane, Kathy Bates, even Victor Garber has some really poignant lines in this movie about Titanic itself, that while he was a historical figure, and you got to be very careful about how you represent the actual historical figures, it just made him very endearing and memorable in this movie. And how could I forget the captain of the ship? I can't remember the actor's name, but he's King Theoden from Lord of the Rings, and he just is such a fantastic actor. He brings a quiet dignity to this role as the captain. He's pretty stoic throughout this movie, but there's something behind his eyes where you really do get a sense that he knows that the ship might be in trouble, that he's very cautious, that he doesn't want to do anything too rash or too bombastic. He's got people in his ear telling him what to do and how to run his own ship, which definitely frustrates him, but he can't let it show because he's the captain and he needs to do the right thing. Everything that you read about Titanic history sounds like hyperbole, even though it's all entirely true. Titanic was the biggest ship in the world. It was the biggest moving object that humanity had ever created. It had the shipbuilder, it had the owner of the ship on board, it had a very clear class divide among the passengers. It sank very slowly, giving people enough time to panic and go into that survival mode and maybe make rash decisions. And just 100 little details that when you read this, you're like, this couldn't have happened this way. This has to be fiction or editorialization or hyperbole. But no, that's actually how it went down. I think James Cameron knew that, so when he put in fictional characters for the sake of plot, making the storyline a little bit more melodramatic kind of fit the overall tone of the event, because it was just such a grand event. It was a grand ship, it had grand people in it, and it went down in spectacular fashion. That's when the second half of this movie, the more action survival side, really kicks in, because now that you're fully invested in the romance, and that arc really culminates with two scenes. It's the love scene in the back of the car, but right before that happens, it's the nude painting scene. And the only thing I really have to say about that scene is that for some reason James Cameron really has a knack for not really using nudity in his movies, but when he does, it is, for whatever reason, the most important thing for the plot of that movie as a whole. In this case, he uses the modern day framing device of Bill Paxton as a treasure hunter, and he's going into the wreckage of Titanic, looking for that heart of the sea diamond. While he doesn't find it, he does find this picture of Rose wearing nothing but the diamond. And that's the clue that yes, the diamond is real. And now Rose herself, who's now almost 101 years old, comes into the movie, recognizes the painting as her, and now tells the story of Titanic to Bill Paxton and all of his guys, and that's the movie that you're watching. It's actually a pretty brilliant framing device. And it does make that scene feel less gratuitous, and actually the thing that sets the plot in motion. That painting is super important. But this also isn't the first time he's done something like this. The Terminator movies are also perfect examples of nudity used sparingly, but super super crucial for the plot to work. The Terminators, when they go back in time, they need to be covered in human skin to blend in, but that also means they need to come back naked. Then we also know that Sarah and Kyle need to do it so that John Connor can be conceived and then born and then save the world from all the robots. That scene is also super integral to the plot, if not the most central scene to the entire Terminator franchise. But I digress. And going back to Titanic, after you fully bought into all this romance and you think that, okay, maybe Jack and Rose are gonna make it, that their relationship is gonna bloom here, iceberg right ahead, and now the ship is sinking, and now everything is in turmoil, and this is handled masterfully. Because the ship is sinking so slowly and the movie actually gives you time to understand the weight of the situation, you see a pretty realistic progression of panic. It doesn't just all of a sudden turn on and now people are pushing each other off of the ship. No, at first it's actually pretty orderly. People are getting into the lifeboats, everyone's behaving, and then you start to see people putting two and two together that, hey, maybe there aren't enough lifeboats for everybody. On top of that, you see people being held down in the third-class steerage quarters that aren't allowed to go up on deck yet until all the rich people have gotten into lifeboats first, and now the class stuff is really starting to show. And you also just have some really dramatic scenes of suspense and tension, like when Rose needs to rescue Jack. The fact that you're following Rose to get an axe, to come back, do some practice swings, and it's just taking so long, all the while you're seeing the water level slowly increase around them. It just keeps you on the edge of your seat, and then they got to get out of there and go up to the deck. Now by this point things are getting a little rough. You got guns going off, you got people jumping off over the side into freezing water. It's a mess, and every time you cut back to a wide shot of the ship, you see it in a different stage of sinking. You actually get a pretty good sense of the progression, because when you're close up on the characters on the deck or in the hallways underneath, you don't really get a sense of, okay, how far along is the ship? When you pull out now, you're seeing, okay, it's starting to tip, it's going even more now, and oh my gosh, we're almost at the breaking point when it's going to split in half. It just elevates the tension so much. You really do get that sense of, okay, a lot of people are going to die, it's going to be ugly. And the movie doesn't really sugarcoat it. There are some grisly deaths in this movie. Even though this is a PG-13 movie and there's not really a lot of blood or gratuitous violence, some of these deaths do hit pretty hard, like the guy that falls over the top and smacks onto the propeller on the way down. It does kind of make me chuckle a little bit watching it, just in that very dark humor kind of way. But even after the ship splits and the stern comes crashing down onto all the people trying to float for their lives, all those people are dead. And then probably the most harrowing scene in the whole movie is when you have this one lifeboat just looking around for any survivors, and you see all these dead bodies in the water that have just frozen to death. They look terrifying. They're all stiff and pale, and their eyes are a different color, and you even see Jack freezing to death on the edge of that door, which, yeah, I do understand the criticism of the door, but for me, it wasn't really something that popped into my head watching it, because at the very beginning of the scene, you see both of them try to get up, and then it starts to tip. It doesn't look like it's going to work, so Jack then stays off. And I think what's more important than the actual buoyancy level of that door is the idea that Jack is doing what Cal couldn't do, and that's actually let the women and children get on the boats first and put himself second behind them, which just cements the fact that Leonardo DiCaprio was the one that she should go with. It's not a complicated question in this movie, and I think this movie benefits from it being a pretty black and white choice for Kate Winslet. I think that works really well to get us on her side, to get us on the side of the romance that's blooming between her and Jack. When you see Jack freeze to death in the water, it's just one more selfless act for her benefit that Kel would never do in 100 years. And that's pretty much Titanic. It is an epic movie in the true sense of the word, a movie that Hollywood doesn't really make too much nowadays. It has a very old Hollywood feel that I'm sure felt nostalgic and like a throwback even back in 1997. And for me watching again, I really did get sucked into the magic and grandeur of it all. It's a sweeping romance, it's a melodrama, but it's also a disaster movie, a survival movie made by the king of action in the 90s, so you know that the talent is there. And I feel like the only reason that this movie got the backlash that it did is because it was so popular when it came out that a lot of people, either in bad faith or just wanting to be a contrarian, started to point out all the little plot holes or some of the character choices and plot points that were simplified and not made all that complex, and equating that as it being bad. And I don't think it's bad in the case of Titanic as it would be in other movies. These plot holes, these little conveniences, I think all are part of the genre that this movie is. This movie is melodrama from beginning to end. The only scenes that play out in any kind of reality are the framing device scenes at the beginning, end, and, you know, kind of sprinkled in the middle. But everything else that takes place in 1912 has a sheen of nostalgia and times gone by about it that feels a bit artificial and melodramatic, but it still keeps with the spirit of the event. And I think James Cameron did a masterful job at that, and I don't think it deserves all the backlash. Sure, it's fun to talk about some of the things that don't exactly add up. I found that not only are these moments pretty few and far between, but they don't even matter that much in the grand scheme of this movie. The story that's trying to tell still works, even with those little nitpicks. But now I turn it over to you guys. What do you think about Titanic? Do you think it deserves all the backlash that it's gotten over the years? Whatever you think, let me know in the comments, and if you like this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe for more content, and hit the notification bell to be notified every time I upload a video. And as always, I'm Colby, this is my nerdy talk, and I'll see you in the next video.